Hi boys and girls, this is Mrs. Paisley here, and our next big project is going to be relief printmaking. So this presentation is the introduction to our big unit, and we are going to be looking at woodblock prints. Although our printmaking techniques are going to involve linoleum, it is still the same technique of carving away linoleum and then printing on top of it. The two cultures we're going to be looking at are Japanese woodblock prints and German expressionist woodblock prints. They are very different, and I hope you enjoy looking at them. The first culture is the Japanese woodblock prints. It is from the ukiyo-e period, and it ranges from the 1600s to 1868, so that's 200 plus years, a much bit wider span than the German expressionists that only lasted 30 years. But ukiyo-e stands for, in direct translation, it stands for floating world or impermanent beauty. So the things that you notice that are around you that just kind of pass you by and you never take notice of them, that's kind of that impermanent beauty. When we look through the images, their themes are everyday life, theater, nature, and war. We can tell a lot about their culture from looking at these three things. That think about their everyday life. It's very different from how we have our everyday life now. Their theater is very different from our modern day theater. So just pay attention to all of this. Here's a picture of an everyday life scene. Okay, we are automatically drawn to the woman in the middle. She is reading a note. It's a very long note. Their books are on scrolls often. But you can follow her gaze down to the little dog playing on her kimono. She's just caught up in that little moment of the dog playing at her feet. So it's something that we can find similar to our times. Our pets are playing and we kind of watch them and giggle. But obviously the scene is very different from what our everyday life would look like. Here's another everyday life scene, a woman combing her hair. And the Japanese really wanted to make sure that they were their own culture. They didn't want to be influenced from Europe. They didn't want to be influenced from China. And this was their way of saying, we don't need to be like Europe. We don't need to show quite as much skin as all of the European paintings were doing. And so in this painting you can see just like a little bit of her wrist and a little bit of her neck, and that was plenty for them to say, we still know what beauty looks like. We don't need to show everything. So that's an interesting part. You'll also notice that the date is past the 1868 date, but that's because so many artists loved the style and the meaning behind keeping the culture in Japan, and so they continued to make images very similar. Here's a very famous one. It's by Hokusai, and he did 36 images of Mount Fuji. You can tell over in Japan, everybody knew where Mount Fuji was. It was part of their island. Japan is an island, and so water was everywhere. Everybody knew where the ocean was, and so it was a very big part of their way of life. This one really deals with composition, how the picture is arranged very much, or like the Japanese artists really paid attention to the composition. Your eye kind of enters from the right-hand side, goes around the waves, over the crest of the wave, and it kind of points you directly at Mount Fuji in the background. And then as you're looking at Mount Fuji, you see, oh my gosh, there's fishermen in boats there. And so your eye just keeps moving around the painting, the print a lot. So that's another thing to think about, is the composition. Here is another print from a different artist, but it still has Mount Fuji in the background. It's still everyday life because it would have just been somebody's house cat sitting on a windowsill looking out the window. Something we might see in our everyday life as well. But different scene, different architecture. Here's another one that we can kind of relate to in a few months here when it's snowing. But our architecture would be very different. Our clothing would be very different. So think about even doing an interpretation of somebody else's artwork. How would that scene look here? Our houses would look different, everything. Moving on to a different theme is theater. So when we see a poster for a movie, that's our modern day theater, you often see a famous actor on the cover. on the poster. It's trying to entice you to go see the movie. And so this would have been a famous actor, and they would have been saying, hey, come see this play because he is a great actor, you need to come see it. And so it was another form of advertisement, but it was done with woodblock printing. This one has much more dramatic makeup on it because it must have been a much more intense play. So, the date is wrong in this slide. Sorry about that. Much more animated one. Okay, all these actors probably would be recognizable of some sort, but you can tell this one's much more animated. So, different kind of play. Another theme is nature. So Japanese people eat a lot of fish because the ocean is always around them. So here's a print of a fish. Something else to note in this picture is all the very fancy handwriting up at the top. This is another form of them saying we want to be our own culture. We want to make our own writing that's much more graceful. We don't want the boxy letters like the Chinese letters of our neighbors. And so that was another form of them saying that they are their own people. Here are river trout. We have brook trout in Maine, and so something similar with our themes. So you can think about things that we see around Maine that you might be interested in. Here's one on war. Okay, so down in the right-hand corner you see a younger man, and he's reaching up and he's saying stop to the big lion or the big tiger. And he's protecting his father. His father is laying down in the rice field right there. But it's basically a statement saying even a single person can stand up to the big lion. Maybe that, I keep calling it a lion, sorry about that. The big tiger, maybe the tiger stands for another country. Maybe it's symbolic of another country that's invading. And it's telling everybody to stand up. Even if you're one person, you can still stand up against them. So think about how you can show war in an appropriate way if you're wanting to do that. Like, how can you put your voice and your viewpoint into an artwork without the guns and the severe violence? Alright, moving on to the German Expressionist prints. Okay, their time span was much shorter. It was a 30-year time span, and in this time span, Europe was dealing with World War I, and then towards the end of this time period, World War II was starting. So it was a very tumultuous time in Europe. Also, the modern art movement was going on, and it really dealt with artists wanting to really make statements and really be expressive with their artworks, put their emotions out there, and also to help people that are looking at the artworks to also be very expressive, or to understand the emotions involved with what they were making artworks about. So theirs are basically done in black and white, very different from the Japanese prints. Here you can pay attention to like the direction that they're carving in her hair. Really tells you more about her. She's got a candle, she looks kind of worried. You can tell something's going on in their culture. Here's a much more abstract one, so it's getting into more of the expressive part. And so when you're looking at this picture, think about how did they have to do it. I will show you guys demonstrations, but think about every place you see white, the artist has to carve away some material. And so all those little triangles on her, above her hairline, are, they had to carve those away. And all the lines on her nose to form like shadows on her cheeks, those all had to be carved away. This one is another portrait, because that's one of their big themes is portraits. And so it's an alpine shepherd, okay? You can see the mountains in the background, so that's telling you it's in the mountains. And you can see he's really weathered with all of the wrinkles on his skin. You can tell he's a shepherd with his cow right behind him. But something else I want you to look at in this picture is all the different textures. Okay, the texture on his jacket is very different from the texture in the little town that's behind him. it's very different from the lines on his face, and those lines on his face are different from the lines that are carved into the clouds. So paying attention to texture, because we're going to be working with shape and texture when we work on these projects, how those two elements of art work together. In this picture, like, his hair is one dark shape. The shadows of the mountains are a shape. Okay, so thinking about that. Here's another one, powerful image of standing up, being powerful. This one has great shapes in the shadows of the person's leg and underneath the pants leg, and on like just different shadows in the clothing. Those are all definitive shapes. Also the texture, the carving, the direction of all the lines, that's how they had to carve. That's going to be very telling for different textures that you want to create. Buildings and towns was another part, and you might even argue that this is part of everyday life as well. And I could accept that argument as well, so bridging both the Japanese artwork and the German expressionist for being part of everyday life. But this is Berlin. This is one of their big cities, and so you need to see like the different shapes in the windows and all the different shapes in the roofs and the shapes of the bridge, all kinds of different things going on in this one. Here's another town. I love the direction of the carving with the sun. It's really telling of how the rays of light go everywhere. Here's a great little town. Great shapes in like the buildings, the shadows, the shadowed side versus the really bright side. Also the textures in the sky are really nice. And so there's great white shapes as well in the land. And so when you're thinking about making your image, really try to think about planning where the dark spaces are and where the light spaces are. Here's one that shows a bit more emotion. The title is Woman in the Lap of Death. It's by Kathy Kolowitz. She's one of my most favorite artists. She's got such emotion in her pictures. But the woman curled up is obviously very sick. The person holding her doesn't look too healthy either. It's just a very sad artwork. And it could have been a statement about what is happening to our people. Could have been a direct statement about something. But you can tell like the clothing is very dark so that the people's faces are that stand out a lot. So that's what you really pay attention to. You can also see the really bony hands that are there. It's just a very sad picture. So for class, when you guys come in, we're going to be starting to draw some various ideas. We're going to be making artworks we're going to be making ours out of linoleum, and it's going to be 4 inches by 6 inches. And so we're going to start drawing multiple ideas. You can try a different idea from each theme. You can try some from the Japanese themes. You can try some from the German expressionist. You can go back through this presentation and you can look at certain artworks if you really liked that style. But we're going to be making multiple ideas, and then we're going to start working on our final one later on. And I'll show you guys how to do that eventually as well. So that will be when you guys come into class, is we'll start working on developing our ideas. And I look forward to having a discussion with you on this presentation when you guys get into class. Bye guys.